6 men in dark suits moved through the golden doors of Bellamy's restaurant, like shadows with intent. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, servers glided between tables draped in white silk, and the low murmur of wealth filled the air. But no one noticed the danger until it was already inside. Female billionaire CEO Vanessa Palmer sat at her corner table, signing contracts that would reshape industries, a glass of vintage wine beside her leather portfolio. Then a fist came crashing down on her table, glasses shattered, silverware clattered against Italian marble. 6 against 1. It should have been a massacre. But from the kitchen doorway, a quiet man in a cook's apron stepped forward. His name was Bennett Steele. And what happened in the next 6 seconds left the entire room speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The attack began with calculated precision. The first man lunged across the table, grabbing Vanessa Palmer by the collar of her designer blazer, yanking her forward so violently that her chair tipped backward. Her head snapped to the side, the metallic taste of blood flooding her mouth instantly. The second attacker was faster, leaner. He swept her documents to the floor and slammed her briefcase shut, trapping her hand beneath the leather. She cried out, pain shooting up her arm. The third moved behind her, blocking any escape route, his eyes cold and patient like a predator who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The fourth and fifth flanked the sides, creating a human cage. The sixth stood at the entrance, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with grim satisfaction. Screams erupted throughout Bellamy's. Forks clattered against fine china. High heels scrambled across marble as patrons knocked over chairs in their panic. The air, once fragrant with roasted duck and truffle, risotto, now thickened with terror. Sitting 2 tables away, Thania Foster, Vanessa's chief financial officer, froze. Her water glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. She had spent 15 years navigating boardroom battles. But this was different. This was violence, raw and immediate. She lunged forward instinctively, reaching for her boss, but hands shoved her back. She hit the edge of a table hard, gasping as pain flared across her ribs. Near the kitchen entrance, Bennett Steele had been checking orders. He wasn't officially kitchen staff, just a maintenance worker who filled in wherever Bellamy's needed extra hands. To most people, he was invisible. A man in his late 30s with quiet eyes and calloused hands who kept his head down and his past buried. But invisibility was a choice, a survival mechanism. He hadn't registered the first scream, hadn't looked up when wine spilled across white tablecloths. What reached him was the angle of movement in his peripheral vision, a pattern of attack he recognized too well. His body moved before his mind could form a coherent thought. Bennett's mind split into 2 tracks. One part was still the father who made peanut butter sandwiches every morning and checked homework every night. The other was the soldier whose reflexes lived deeper than memory, carved into muscle and instinct during years of training that never truly left. The first attacker never saw him coming. Bennett moved with brutal efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. His palm struck the man's sternum with surgical precision, collapsing him like a marionette with cut strings. The sound was air evacuating lungs in a desperate wheeze. Before the man could recover, Bennett's elbow cracked against his temple. He dropped, unconscious but breathing. The second attacker spun, fist already swinging in a wide arc, meant to shatter bone. Bennett stepped into the strike instead of away, his body coiling with practiced control. His fingers found the pressure point below the man's collarbone, a technique drilled into him during training sessions that lasted until dawn. The attacker's knees buckled. He collapsed like wet fabric. The third had already reached inside his jacket. Metal glinted under the chandelier light. Knife or gun, it didn't matter. Bennett's foot hooked the man's ankle, sweeping his legs out from under him. His hand locked around the weapon arm as they fell together. The crack of skull meeting marble echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. The weapon skittered across the floor. The fourth attacker hesitated, eyes widening. As he processed what had just happened, 3 of his companions were down in seconds. Bennett didn't give him time to think. A quick jab to the solar plexus, followed by a controlled strike to the side of the neck. The man crumpled. The fifth rushed forward with a roar, trying to use momentum and rage to overwhelm this unexpected obstacle. Bennett sidestepped, used the man's own force against him, and guided him, face first, into the edge of a marble pillar. He slid to the ground, groaning. The sixth, the one who had been standing guard, finally moved. He was bigger than the others, his movements more controlled. This one had training. Bennett could see it in his stance, in the way he protected his center line. They circled each other for 3 heartbeats, the restaurant holding its breath. Then they collided. It was brief and brutal. The man threw a combination meant to test defenses. Bennett blocked, countered, and when the opening appeared, he took it. A strike to the liver doubled the man over. A controlled knee to the face ended it. Silence fell like a curtain. 6 bodies, 12 seconds. Vanessa Palmer sat frozen in her overturned chair, one hand pressed to her bleeding lip, her eyes locked on the quiet man standing among the wreckage. Thania clutched her ribs, staring in disbelief. Other guests remained motionless, phones raised, recording everything. Bennett stood in the center of it all, chest rising and falling steadily, his cook's apron somehow still tied neatly at his waist. His expression was unreadable, calm, as if he'd simply stopped a minor kitchen fire instead of dismantling 6 trained attackers. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Bennett raised his hands slowly, palms open, signaling compliance, even as his eyes tracked every exit in the room, every window, every potential threat. Years of training whispered warnings in his head, but he forced himself to stay still. Officers burst through the entrance moments later, weapons drawn, shouting commands. They approached cautiously, their instincts telling them this man was more than he appeared. "I stopped them," Bennett said, his voice clipped and even. "I don't know who they are. I'm fine." But behind those simple words, his mind was racing. He saw phones pointed at him, cameras flashing, a story forming that he couldn't control. Security. Footage would be pulled. His face would be everywhere. Questions would be asked. And all he could think was, what will this mean for Hudson? His son, his 8-year-old boy who thought his dad just fixed broken things at a fancy restaurant, who didn't know about the deployments, the missions, the life Bennett had walked away from when everything fell apart. By the time police finished taking statements, Bennett had already planned his exit. He gave them minimal information. Yes, he worked here. No, he didn't know the attackers. Yes, he had prior training. No, he didn't want medical attention. Vanessa Palmer stood across the restaurant, Thania hovering protectively beside her. The CEO's eyes never left Bennett. She watched him deflect questions with practiced ease, watched him try to fade back into invisibility even as everyone in the room stared at him like he'd descended from myth. When their eyes finally met across the chaos, something passed between them. Recognition. Not of faces, but of souls who understood what it meant to carry weight the world couldn't see. Bennett nodded once, a brief acknowledgement, then turned toward the kitchen exit. "Wait," Vanessa called out, her voice cutting through the noise. He paused but didn't turn back. "Thank you," she said simply. Bennett's shoulders tensed. Then he disappeared through the doorway, leaving behind 6 unconscious attackers, a room full of witnesses, and a story that was already beginning to spread beyond the walls of Bellamy's restaurant. Outside, the night air hit his face like a slap. Bennett walked 3 blocks before allowing himself to stop, leaning against a brick wall in an alley. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. He pulled out his phone. One missed call from Mrs. Davenport, the neighbor who watched Hudson after school. He needed to get home, needed to see his son, needed to hold on to the one thing that mattered more than anything else in this world. But as he walked toward the subway station, Bennett Steele knew with absolute certainty that his carefully constructed invisible life had just been shattered beyond repair. By midnight, the footage had escaped into the digital world like wildfire. Shaky cell phone video, captured from behind an overturned table, showed only Bennett's back, the blur of controlled violence, and the devastating efficiency of his movements. The angle was poor, the lighting worse, but it was enough. The internet had found its newest obsession. 7 million views by morning, 40 million within the week. In his small Brooklyn apartment, Bennett shut the blinds tighter than necessary. He stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes by hand even though they were already clean, scrubbing as if he could wash away the exposure, the attention, the inevitable questions. But Hudson found it first. "Dad," his 8-year-old said that afternoon, small hands clutching a tablet, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Is this you?" His voice trembled with pride and fear, the way kids sound when they discover their parent might be something more than just a person who makes breakfast and helps with spelling homework. Bennett dried his hands slowly, buying himself seconds he didn't have. He knelt down, brushing dark hair from Hudson's face. The boy had his mother's eyes, bright and questioning, that stubborn set to his jaw that had been Julia's signature expression. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Yes," Bennett admitted softly. "That's me, but it's not special. Just helping someone who needed help. Like when we help Mrs. Davenport carry her groceries upstairs." Hudson wasn't interested in modesty. He threw his arms around Bennett's neck, whispering fiercely against his shoulder, "I knew you were a superhero." Something inside Bennett fractured. A soundless crack, like ice thawing after a long winter. He held his son tight, his scarred hands trembling. Julia would have known what to say. Julia always knew how to explain the complicated parts of life in ways that made sense to a kid, but Julia wasn't here anymore. Bennett's story hadn't begun in that restaurant. It had been carved across years of choices and sacrifices, written in scars both visible and hidden. Once, he wore combat boots and tactical gear. Once, his life was measured in deployments and classified operations. Navy veteran, though he never specified which unit, the kind of service where stories stayed buried in redacted files and the memories of men who didn't talk about what they'd done. He had been good at it. Too good, maybe. The precision, the control, the ability to read a situation and respond in fractions of seconds. Those skills had kept him alive through tours in places whose names he still couldn't speak aloud. But that life ended the day Julia collapsed. She had been making breakfast, laughing at something Hudson had said about dinosaurs wearing hats. Then she was on the floor, her eyes confused, her words slurred. Stroke. The doctor's word had hit like incoming fire. Massive. Unsurvivable. She lasted 3 days in the ICU, long enough for Bennett to hold her hand and make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Long enough to whisper goodbye. Not long enough for any of it to make sense. Hudson had been 7, old enough to understand death but too young to understand forever. Bennett had carried rifles through hostile territory. Now he carried the weight of single parenthood. He had been trained to neutralize threats. Julia's absence was a threat he couldn't fight, an enemy he couldn't defeat. The transition wasn't gradual. One day he was Bennett Steele, operator with a skill set governments paid for. The next, he was Bennett Steele, widower, trying to figure out how to braid hair and pack lunches and explain to a grieving boy why mommy wasn't coming home. The military offered support, his unit sent condolences. None of it helped during the 3 a.m. panic attacks when Hudson woke up screaming for his mother. So Bennett quit. He traded tactical operations for whatever work he could find. Security jobs at first, but those required too much time away from Hudson. Construction gigs that paid cash under the table. Finally, Bellamy's restaurant, where they needed someone who could fix broken equipment, fill in when staff called out, and stay invisible. Brooklyn became their world. A 2-bedroom apartment above a bodega, where the owner's wife, Mrs. Davenport, brought them homemade empanadas when she thought Bennett looked too thin. A public school 3 blocks away where teachers adored Hudson's wild imagination. A small park with rusted swings where Bennett pushed his son every evening, the rhythm of chains creaking becoming a kind of meditation. His job at Bellamy's wasn't glamorous. Fixing industrial refrigerators, unclogging drains, occasionally filling in wherever they needed hands. But the hours worked. Evenings meant Hudson could stay with Mrs. Davenport. Mornings meant Bennett could walk him to school, check his homework, make him scrambled eggs that were always slightly overcooked but served with a smile. For Bennett, invisibility was survival. He kept his head down, never missed work, never drew attention. The staff barely knew his last name. Customers never saw him, which had been exactly the point, until that night changed everything. Inside him, there had always been a war. Part of him wanted to bury the soldier he'd been, to become just another single dad trying to make rent and raise a good kid. Another part couldn't forget. His body remembered too much. The way his shoulders squared without conscious thought. The way his eyes automatically scanned every room for exits and threats. The way his hands tensed whenever someone moved too quickly near Hudson. He tried to bury the operator, but that part of him never truly slept. And now, thanks to one viral video, the world had seen him, really seen him. 2 days after the incident, Bennett walked Hudson to school as usual. But this time, other parents stared, whispered. One father nodded with obvious respect. A mother smiled and said, "Thank you for what you did." Hudson beamed with pride, but Bennett felt his stomach tighten. At the school gate, Hudson turned, backpack bouncing. "Dad, can I tell my teacher you're famous?" "I'm not famous," Bennett said firmly. "I'm your dad. That's all that matters. But everyone's talking about it. Tyler's mom showed us the video. You were so cool." Bennett crouched down, holding his son's shoulders gently. "Listen to me, buddy. What happened at that restaurant? That's not who I am anymore. I'm just a guy who fixes things, and makes sure you eat your vegetables. Okay?" Hudson studied him with those two knowing eyes. "But you saved that lady." "I did what needed to be done. Now you need to go learn your multiplication tables." Hudson hugged him quickly, then ran toward the entrance where his friends waited. Bennett watched until the boy disappeared inside, then turned back toward the street. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. It was the 7th call that morning. The attention was building like pressure in a sealed container. Reporters had found Bellamy's. They'd found his name in the employee records. It was only a matter of time before they found his address. Bennett walked back to the apartment, each step feeling heavier. Inside, he sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by Hudson's drawings taped to the walls. Dinosaurs and spaceships and stick figures labeled, "Me and Dad." He had fought in deserts and mountains, had completed missions that would never be declassified, had survived things that should have broken him. But this, keeping his son safe from a different kind of danger, felt like the hardest mission yet. The pressure mounted like a slow-building storm. By the end of the week, Bennett's face was everywhere. Blurry screenshots from security footage appeared on news websites. Blog posts speculated about his background. Reddit threads dissected his fighting technique frame by frame. Someone had found his LinkedIn profile from years ago, back when he'd listed security consultant as his occupation. The internet had christened him the Ghost Guardian. Bennett hated it. He stopped going to the corner bodega because the owner wanted to shake his hand and tell everyone who walked in about the hero upstairs. He avoided the park where other parents now recognized him. He took different routes to Hudson's school, varying the times, the paths, anything to avoid becoming predictable. But you can't hide from the internet. Reporters started showing up at Bellamy's. The restaurant manager, a thin man named Philip, who had barely spoken to Bennett before, suddenly wanted him visible. "Think of the publicity," Philip said, his eyes gleaming with dollar signs. "We could say you're head of security, give interviews. People would come just to see where it happened." Bennett quit the next day. He walked out during the lunch rush, turned in his keys, and never looked back. The paycheck had been steady, but not worth this. Not worth risking Hudson's safety for someone else's profit. Money got tight immediately. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Hudson needed new shoes. The refrigerator was making a noise that suggested expensive repairs were coming. But Bennett had survived worse than poverty. What he couldn't survive was the look on Hudson's face when kids at school started treating him differently. Some with awe, asking if his dad could teach them to fight. Others with fear, their parents having warned them to stay away from that violent man's son. Hudson came home one afternoon, quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack by the door and climbed onto the couch without his usual energy. "Rough day?" Bennett asked, setting aside the job listings he'd been scrolling through. "Tommy's mom said you're dangerous." Hudson's voice was small. "She said Tommy can't come to my birthday party." Bennett felt rage flare hot in his chest. The kind of anger that used to fuel him through impossible missions. But he forced it down, forced his voice to stay calm. "What do you think?" he asked, sitting beside his son. "Am I dangerous?" Hudson looked up at him, those serious eyes that were too old for 8 years. "You saved that lady. You stopped bad guys. That's what heroes do." "I did," Bennett admitted. "But that doesn't make me a hero. It makes me someone who knew how to help and chose to help. That's all." "So why is everyone making it weird?" Bennett pulled Hudson close, feeling the small weight of him, so fragile and so incredibly strong at the same time. "Because people don't always understand the difference between violence and protection. They see the fighting and they get scared. But you know me. You know I would never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it." "I know," Hudson whispered, "but I wish they knew that too." That night, after Hudson fell asleep, Bennett sat on their small balcony overlooking the street. Traffic hummed below. Sirens wailed in the distance. The city breathed its usual rhythm, indifferent to the chaos in his life. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Steele?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "My name is Brielle Douglas. I'm calling on behalf of Vanessa Palmer." Bennett's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't want publicity. I don't want interviews. I just want to be left alone. That's not why I'm calling." A pause. "Miss Palmer would like to meet with you. Privately. No press, no cameras. Just a conversation." "About what?" "About gratitude. And possibly about a job. If you're interested." Bennett laughed, the sound harsh. "I'm not interested in being anyone's bodyguard." "That's not what she's offering." Brielle's voice stayed patient. "But she'd like to explain. In person. Would you be willing to meet? 1 hour. Public place of your choosing. If you don't like what she has to say, you walk away. No obligations." Bennett should have said no. Should have hung up and blocked the number. But rent was due and Hudson needed shoes, and the refrigerator was definitely dying. "Prospect Park," he said finally. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The entrance by the lake. She'll be there." The next afternoon, Bennett stood by the water, watching ducks glide across the surface. Hudson was at school. Mrs. Davenport had agreed to pick him up. The day was clear, almost warm. The kind of autumn afternoon that felt borrowed from summer. Vanessa Palmer arrived exactly on time. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, sunglasses covering her eyes. No entourage, no security detail visible, though Bennett's trained eye caught the subtle presence of at least 2 professionals maintaining a careful distance. "Mr. Steele," she said, extending her hand. "Just Bennett," he replied, shaking it briefly. They walked slowly along the path, neither speaking at first. Vanessa seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to thank you in person," she finally said. "What you did, stepping in when you had no obligation to, it saved my life. You already thanked me at the restaurant. That wasn't enough." She stopped, turning to face him. "Those men weren't random. They were sent by someone I put in prison 3 years ago. Corporate espionage case. He hired them from behind bars to make a statement." Bennett's jaw tightened. They'll try again. Probably. Vanessa's voice was steady. Which is why I've increased my security. But that's not why I asked to meet. Then why? She pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. I had my people look into you. Not deep, just surface level. Enough to know you're a single father. That you lost your wife. That you quit a job you probably needed because the attention was affecting your son. Bennett's eyes hardened. If this is charity disguised as gratitude, I'm not interested. It's not charity. Vanessa handed him the envelope. It's a consulting fee. One-time payment for services rendered. No strings attached. No publicity. No expectations. Just acknowledgement that you lost income because of what happened, and that's not fair. Bennett opened the envelope. Inside was a check that would cover 3 months of rent and then some. I can't accept this, he said, though his hand betrayed him by not immediately giving it back. You can, you should. Vanessa's voice softened. I know what it's like to be a woman in a world that wants to see you fail. You know what it's like to be a veteran in a country that thanks you for your service but doesn't follow through. We both understand survival. Take it. Buy your son something nice. Fix whatever needs fixing. And know that if you ever need anything else, my door is open. She started to walk away, then paused. One more thing. There's a second number in that envelope. My direct line. Not for business. Just in case you ever need someone who understands what it means to have targets on your back. Then she was gone. Her security detail materializing from the trees to escort her to a waiting car. Bennett stood alone by the water, holding an envelope that represented temporary relief and a phone number that represented something he couldn't quite name. He thought about Tommy's mom calling him dangerous. About Hudson's birthday party that would be smaller because parents were afraid. About the way his son's eyes lit up when he called him a superhero. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe they did understand each other. But understanding didn't make the danger go away. It just meant you recognized it when it arrived. Bennett pocketed the envelope and walked back toward the subway station. He had a son to pick up from school, shoes to buy, and a life to keep as normal as possible. The viral video would fade eventually. The internet would find a new obsession, and Bennett Steele would fade back into the background where he belonged. At least, that's what he told himself. The grocery store on Fifth Avenue wasn't where Bennett expected his world to tilt again. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where autumn sunlight slanted through windows and made everything look softer than it was. Hudson pushed the cart, standing on the bottom rail and riding it like a scooter while Bennett grabbed items from shelves with practiced efficiency. Bread, peanut butter, the off-brand cereal Hudson pretended to hate but ate anyway. They were debating the merits of chocolate chip versus oatmeal cookies when Bennett saw her. Vanessa Palmer stood in the produce section, holding a cantaloupe like she'd never seen one before. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy ponytail. No makeup. No armor, just a woman trying to figure out if a melon was ripe. She looked up, and their eyes met across a pyramid of apples. For a moment, neither moved. Then Hudson, oblivious to the tension, called out, "Dad, can we get the cookies with the rainbow chips?" The spell broke. Vanessa smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from the polished CEO he'd seen on magazine covers to someone approachable, almost vulnerable. She set down the cantaloupe and walked over. "Bennett," she said, "and this must be Hudson." Hudson looked up at her with open curiosity, the way kids do before the world teaches them to be guarded. "Do you know my dad?" "I do," Vanessa said, crouching to his level. "He helped me when some very bad people tried to hurt me." Hudson's chest puffed with pride. "He's really strong and brave, and he makes the best grilled cheese even though the edges are always burned." Bennett felt heat creep up his neck. "Hudson." "What?" "They are burned, but they're still good." Vanessa laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "I bet they're perfect. My assistant makes all my meals, and I can't remember the last time I actually cooked something myself. You should come over for dinner." Hudson announced with the fearless hospitality of someone who didn't understand social boundaries. "Dad always makes too much anyway." "Hudson," Bennett said more firmly, mortified. "Miss Palmer is busy." "Actually," Vanessa said, standing and meeting Bennett's eyes. "I'm not. Not tonight, anyway." Bennett opened his mouth to deflect, to make an excuse. But something in her expression stopped him. She looked hopeful. Not in the way powerful people look when they want something, but in the way lonely people look when they're offered connection. "It's just spaghetti," he warned. "Nothing fancy." "Fancy is overrated," Vanessa replied. "What time?" An hour later, Bennett was panicking. He stood in their small apartment, looking at it through the eyes of a billionaire CEO. The couch had a permanent indent from where he sat every night. Hudson's drawings covered the refrigerator like wallpaper. The table wobbled, unless you put a folded napkin under one leg. Nothing matched. Everything was worn. "It's fine," Mrs. Davenport said from the doorway, where she'd appeared with a tray of empanadas. "Stop fussing. She's not coming to judge your furniture. She lives in a penthouse," Bennett muttered. "She probably has artwork worth more than this entire building. Then she needs to see how real people live." Mrs. Davenport set the empanadas on the counter. "You're a good man, Bennett. You're a good father. That's worth more than fancy furniture." Hudson ran in from his room, wearing his favorite shirt, with a dinosaur on it. "Is she here yet?" "Not yet, buddy. Go wash your hands." At 6:30, there was a knock. Bennett opened the door, and for a second, he forgot how to breathe. Vanessa stood there, with a bottle of wine and a bakery box, looking nervous. Actually nervous. Her hands gripped the items a little too tightly, and she'd chewed off most of her lipstick. "Hi," she said. "I brought dessert. I wasn't sure what Hudson liked, so I got an assortment. There's chocolate cake, lemon tart, and some kind of berry thing the baker recommended." "You didn't have to do that," Bennett said, stepping aside to let her in. "I wanted to." She entered, and her eyes swept the apartment with what looked like genuine interest, not judgment. "This is nice. It feels like a home." Hudson bounded over, freshly washed hands still slightly damp. "Want to see my room? I have a model airplane Dad and I built. Well, mostly Dad built it because I kept gluing my fingers together, but I helped." Vanessa laughed. "I would love to see it." Bennett watched his son lead this woman, this billionaire, down the narrow hallway to his small bedroom. He heard Hudson's excited chatter, Vanessa's patient questions. Something in his chest loosened. A knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Dinner was chaos in the best way. Hudson talked non-stop, asking Vanessa questions ranging from, "Do you have a pet?" to, "What's the biggest number you've ever seen?" She answered each one seriously, never talking down to him, never checking her phone. Bennett served spaghetti that was slightly overcooked, garlic bread that was slightly undercooked, and salad from a bag. It was the furthest thing from Bellamy's elegant cuisine. "This is delicious," Vanessa said, and meant it. "You're just being nice," Bennett replied. "I'm not. Do you know how long it's been since someone cooked for me? Since I ate at a table that wasn't a work meeting or a networking dinner." She twirled spaghetti on her fork. "This is the first meal in months where I haven't thought about quarterly earnings." Hudson, sauce on his chin, grinned. "Dad says food tastes better when you make it with people you care about." Vanessa's eyes met Bennett's across the table. "Your dad is a smart man." After dinner, while Bennett washed dishes, Vanessa helped Hudson with a puzzle at the coffee table. He watched them from the kitchen, soapy hands pausing mid-scrub. She sat cross-legged on the floor, not worrying about her expensive jeans, laughing when Hudson insisted a piece went somewhere it clearly didn't fit. "She's nice," Hudson said later, after Vanessa had left with promises to do this again. "And she didn't act weird about our apartment being small." No, Bennett agreed, tucking his son into bed. She didn't. Do you like her? Bennett paused, caught off guard by the directness. I just met her, bud. But do you like her? Hudson persisted with the relentless logic of 8-year-olds. The way you liked Mom. The question hit like a physical blow. Bennett sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. Your mom was special. No one will ever replace her. But Miss Palmer is nice. I like being around her. Is that okay with you? Hudson considered this with a seriousness beyond his years. Mom would want you to be happy. She told me that, before. She said if anything happened to her, I shouldn't be sad forever because that would make her sad too. Bennett's throat closed. He pulled Hudson into a hug, fighting the sting behind his eyes. When did you get so wise? I don't know. Hudson mumbled against his shoulder. Maybe I'm just really smart. Later, alone in the kitchen, Bennett's phone buzzed. Vanessa, thank you for tonight. I can't remember the last time I felt that normal, that human. Bennett stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Bennett, thank you for not judging the burned garlic bread. Vanessa, the burned edges were my favorite part. He smiled at his phone like a teenager, then felt ridiculous for it. But the smile didn't fade. Another message came through. Vanessa, I meant what I said about my door being open. For anything. Not just emergencies. Bennett. Same here. Though my door leads to a lot less square footage. Vanessa. But a lot more heart. He set the phone down, that knot in his chest loosening a little more. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside, for the first time since Julia died, the apartment didn't feel quite so empty. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by courier in a Mercedes that drew stares from everyone on the block. Bennett signed for it, the thick envelope heavy with implications. Inside, embossed letterhead from Palmer Industries, words carefully chosen by lawyers and PR teams. Mr. Steele, it began. We would be honored by your presence at Palmer Industries headquarters. Thursday, 10 a.m. Please allow us to express our gratitude formally and discuss a potential opportunity that may interest you. It was signed by Vanessa herself, her signature bold and confident. Bennett set the letter on the kitchen table and stared at it like it might explode. He knew what this was. A job offer. Security position. Probably. 6 figures. Benefits. A future that didn't involve wondering if he could afford new winter coats for Hudson. He should be grateful. Excited, even. Instead, he felt trapped. That night, after Hudson was asleep, Bennett stood on the balcony smoking a cigarette he'd bummed from the bodega owner. He'd quit years ago. But tonight, the old habit called to him. His phone rang. Vanessa, you got the letter, she said without preamble. I did. And you're thinking of ways to say no. Bennett exhaled smoke into the cold air. Am I that predictable? You're that principled. A pause. Will you at least hear me out before you decide? Vanessa. He used her first name deliberately, establishing that whatever happened next, they weren't CEO and employee. They were two people having a conversation. I know what you're going to offer. Head of security. Good salary. Stability. For Hudson. And I appreciate it. I do. But I can't be someone's hired protection. That's not what I'm offering. Then what? Come Thursday and find out. Her voice carried a hint of challenge. If you don't like it, you walk away. No hard feelings. But you owe it to yourself to at least listen. Bennett crushed the cigarette under his boot. Why does this matter so much to you? The silence stretched long enough that he thought she might not answer. Because, Vanessa finally said, her voice softer. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. Money, connections, opportunities. You're the first person in years who wants nothing. And that's rare. That's valuable. and I'd like to see if we can help each other without it feeling like a transaction. Bennett closed his eyes. I'll come, but I'm not making any promises. Fair enough. Thursday morning, Bennett stood before Palmer Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. Security waved him through with knowing looks. The elevator was marble and mirrors, rising so smoothly he barely felt the motion. The 42nd floor opened onto an office that looked like something from a magazine spread. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls. Furniture that probably cost more than his car. Vanessa stood by the window, her back to him, wearing a charcoal suit that meant business. When she turned, her expression was carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You're persuasive." A ghost of a smile. "It's a useful skill in my line of work." She gestured to a seating area, 2 leather chairs facing each other, over a glass coffee table. Bennett sat, feeling out of place in his off-the-rack jacket. Vanessa sat across from him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then she leaned forward, hands clasped. "Those men at the restaurant," she began. "That wasn't random. It was targeted. The person who sent them is in prison but still has resources. Connections. He wants to hurt me for putting him there. I figured as much. My current security is competent, but they're reactive. They respond to threats after they materialize." She met his eyes. "I need someone who can anticipate. Someone who thinks like a threat." "So you do want a bodyguard?" "No, I want a strategic advisor. Someone who can look at my life, my patterns, my vulnerabilities, and tell me what I'm missing. Not someone who follows me around with an earpiece. Someone who teaches me how to see danger before it arrives." Bennett leaned back, considering. "That's not a full-time job." "No, it's consulting work. You set your own hours. Work from home when possible. Come to the office only when necessary. I'm offering $50,000 for 6 months of consultation. After that, we reassess." The number hung in the air between them. It was more money than Bennett had seen in years. It was Hudson's college fund. It was security and stability and breathing room. "There's a catch," he said. "There's always a catch." Vanessa's smile was wry. "The catch is that if you say yes, you're also saying yes to being in my life. Not just professionally. You've seen how I live, the pressure, the threats. I need someone I trust, and trust isn't something you can buy." Bennett thought about Hudson's burned grilled cheese and puzzle pieces on the living room floor, thought about Vanessa sitting cross-legged in jeans, laughing at his son's terrible jokes. What happens when the 6 months are up? We decide, together. Maybe you walk away with money in the bank and we stay friends. Maybe we extend the arrangement. Maybe something else entirely. She stood, moving to the window. "I'm not trying to trap you, Bennett. I'm trying to survive, and I think maybe you understand what that feels like." He did. Every single day since Julia died, survival had been the objective. Get up, feed Hudson, get him to school, find work, pay bills, repeat, never thinking beyond the next week, the next month. This was different. This was a chance to build something instead of just barely holding on. "I have conditions," Bennett said. Vanessa turned. "Name them." "Hudson comes first. Always. If he needs me, I'm gone, no questions asked." "Agreed. I'm not moving. We stay in our apartment. I don't want him uprooted." "Of course. And this stays professional. I advise. You listen or don't. But I'm not your employee. I'm an independent contractor. That means I can walk away anytime if this doesn't feel right." Vanessa crossed the room, extended her hand. "Deal." Bennett stood, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but her eyes held something warmer. "When do I start?" he asked. "How about now? I have a board meeting in an hour, and security wants to change my route home. I'd like your opinion." Bennett almost smiled. "Almost. You're not wasting any time. Time is the one thing I can't afford to waste." They spent the next hour going over routes, schedules, patterns. Bennett pointed out vulnerabilities she hadn't considered. Predictable coffee runs. The same parking spot every day. An assistant who posted her location on social media without thinking. By the time the meeting ended, Vanessa looked both impressed and slightly terrified. "I've made this too easy for them," she admitted. "You've been focused on running a company. That's not a failure. It's just a blind spot." Bennett stood, gathering the notes he'd made. "I'll have a full assessment to you by Monday." "Bennett," she called as he reached the door. "Thank you for saying yes." He turned back. "Thank you for not making it about charity. It's not charity. It's survival, for both of us." As Bennett rode the elevator down, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose beyond just getting through the day. A reason to use the skills he'd tried so hard to bury. He pulled out his phone and texted Mrs. Davenport. "Bennett, can you watch Hudson an extra hour today? New job just started." Mrs. Davenport. "Of course, Mijo. Is it good?" Bennett looked at his reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. A man who'd been invisible for so long, slowly coming back into focus. "Bennett, yeah, I think it might be." The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Bennett spent mornings with Hudson, the sacred routine of breakfast and backpack checks and walks to school. Then he'd head to a coffee shop 3 blocks from their apartment, laptop open, analyzing Vanessa's schedules and security protocols with the same intensity he'd once applied to mission planning. Twice a week, he went to Palmer Industries, not to hover or guard, but to sit in on meetings where decisions about travel and events were made. He listened quietly, then offered observations that made security teams rethink everything. "Your charity gala next month," he said during one meeting. "You're announcing the location 2 weeks in advance." "We always do," Thania Foster replied, her tone suggesting this was obvious. "That gives threats 2 weeks to plan. Announce the venue the day before. Tell major donors it's an exclusive secret. Make unpredictability part of the brand." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at her lips. "I like it. Make it happen." But the real shift came in the spaces between work. One Saturday, Vanessa showed up at Bennett's apartment with pastries and an admission. "I don't know how to do nothing. Teach me." Hudson, delighted by this, immediately recruited her for his elaborate blanket fort construction project. Bennett watched from the kitchen as this woman, who commanded boardrooms, struggled with fitted sheets and couch cushions, laughing when the whole structure collapsed on her head. "This is harder than quarterly earnings," she said, emerging with her hair full of static. "Welcome to real life," Bennett replied, handing her coffee. They spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing productive. Hudson taught Vanessa his made-up card game, with rules that changed every round. They ordered pizza that arrived cold because the delivery guy got lost. They watched a movie Hudson had seen 17 times, and Vanessa didn't check her phone once. When Hudson fell asleep on the couch between them, Vanessa whispered, "This is the best day I've had in years." Bennett looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the CEO in designer suits, but the woman who'd spent 3 hours losing at a card game and seemed genuinely happy about it. "You're welcome here anytime," he said. Dangerous words. "I might take you up on that." "Good." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Something unspoken passing between them. Then Hudson snored, loud and sudden, and they both laughed, the tension breaking into something easier. Another evening, Vanessa invited them to her penthouse for dinner. Hudson was awestruck by the space, running to the windows to look down at the city lights. "Dad, you can see everything from here. It's like being in an airplane." "Careful by the windows," Bennett said automatically. Vanessa smiled at his protective instinct. "They're reinforced. He'd have to throw a car through them to break the glass." Dinner was catered, elegant, nothing like Bennett's burned garlic bread. But Vanessa seemed uncomfortable with the formality. Halfway through the meal, she disappeared into the kitchen and returned with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. "I asked the chef to leave these," she admitted, "because sometimes you just want something simple." Hudson's face lit up. These are way better than fancy food. They ate sandwiches at her dining table that could seat 12, and it felt less like a billionaire's penthouse and more like home. Later, after Hudson crashed on her couch, worn out from exploring, Bennett and Vanessa stood by the windows looking out at the city. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said quietly. "Sure." "When you look at me, what do you see?" Bennett considered the question carefully. "I see someone who's built something incredible, but paid a price for it. Someone who's forgotten what it feels like to just exist without performance. Someone who's lonely, but won't admit it, because admitting it feels like weakness." Vanessa's breath caught. "That's uncomfortably accurate." "You asked." She turned to face him. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" Now it was Bennett's turn to feel exposed. "I see someone still trying to figure out who he is without the uniform. Someone who's terrified of failing his son. Someone who's scared that if he lets anyone too close, he'll lose them like he lost Julia. And yet," Vanessa said softly, "you let me in. You're persistent. I'm interested." She stepped closer. "In you. In Hudson. In whatever this is becoming." Bennett's heart hammered. "Vanessa, I know. It's complicated. You work for me. Sort of. We come from different worlds. There are 1,000 reasons this is a terrible idea. But," Bennett prompted, "but I can't remember the last time someone looked at me like I was just a person. Not a bank account or a business opportunity. Just Vanessa." Her eyes searched his. "And I think maybe you need someone who looks at you like you're more than just Hudson's dad. Like you're Bennett, whoever that is." Before he could second-guess himself, Bennett reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered against her cheek, rough calluses against soft skin. "I'm figuring that out," he admitted. "But I think I'd like you around while I do." She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. "I'd like that too." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something shifted. A door opening between them, that neither rushed through but both acknowledged. The following weeks wove them together in small, deliberate ways. Vanessa started joining their Sunday morning pancake tradition, learning to flip them without sending batter across the kitchen. Bennett taught her that burned edges weren't failures, just character. Hudson's birthday party became a weird mix of his school friends and Vanessa's assistant Brielle, who showed up with enough balloons to fill the apartment twice over. Vanessa sat on the floor playing musical chairs with 8-year-olds, her $1,000 shoes forgotten under a pile of discarded wrapping paper. Bennett found himself at charity events he'd normally avoid, wearing a suit Vanessa insisted on buying him. "It's a business expense," she'd argued. "You're representing me. I'm standing in a corner watching exits. You're doing it in style now." But the most significant moment came on an ordinary Tuesday. Vanessa had a scare at the office. A package delivered to her desk that security flagged as suspicious. It turned out to be harmless, a gift from a legitimate vendor, but for 2 hours, the building was evacuated. Bennett got the call while helping Hudson with homework. He was there in 15 minutes, finding Vanessa in the street surrounded by police and security teams, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. She saw him and her professional mask crack just for a second, but he saw it. Later, after the all-clear was given, and everyone else had gone back inside, they stood on the sidewalk. Evening was falling, the city transitioning from day to night. "I was scared," Vanessa admitted quietly. "That's human. I don't like being human sometimes. It's exhausting." Bennett stepped closer, not touching, just present. "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep going." She looked up at him. "Is that what you do? Just keep going?" "Every day since Julia died. Some days it's all I can manage. But Hudson needs me to keep going, so I do." "And now?" she asked. "What keeps you going now?" He met her eyes. "More than I used to have. A job that matters. A friend who gets it. A pause. Maybe the start of something else, if we're both brave enough." Vanessa smiled, real and unguarded. "I'm terrified." "Good. Me too." This time, when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Vanessa laughed. This is definitely complicated. Worth it though? She kissed him again, longer this time. Absolutely worth it. The first real warning came on a cold November morning. Bennett arrived at Palmer Industries for a routine security briefing and found the building in controlled chaos. Police cars lined the street, their lights painting the glass facade in alternating blue and red. Thania met him at the entrance, her usual composure replaced with visible tension. "Parking garage," she said without preamble. Two men caught tampering with Vanessa's car. They had tools, wiring, expertise. Bennett's blood went cold. "Bomb? Security thinks so. Bomb squad is down there now." He pushed past her, taking the stairs down instead of waiting for elevators. His training kicked in, old instincts flooding back with crystalline clarity. By the time he reached the garage, he'd already mapped escape routes and calculated blast radius. Vanessa stood behind a police barrier, arms crossed, face pale but controlled. When she saw Bennett, something in her posture softened. "They were caught early," she said as he reached her side. Security patrol interrupted them before they could finish whatever they were doing. "Lucky timing," Bennett replied, his eyes scanning the scene. "Or good protocol." She glanced at him. "The random patrol schedule you suggested. They weren't supposed to sweep this level for another hour, but the unpredictability worked." A small victory, but Bennett felt no satisfaction. This wasn't amateurs. Professionals would have posted lookouts, worked faster. The police said the same thing. Vanessa's voice dropped. "They're pressing the men for information, but so far they're not talking." Bennett watched as investigators moved around her vehicle, their movements careful and deliberate. "This changes things. They're not trying to intimidate anymore. They're trying to kill you. I know. You need to disappear for a while. Let this cool down." Vanessa turned to him, her jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "I have a company to run. A board meeting next week. Investors expecting results. I can't just vanish." "You can if you're dead." The bluntness made her flinch, but he didn't soften it. She needed to understand the stakes. "What do you suggest?" she asked finally. "We set a trap, force them to come to us on our terms." Over the next week, Bennett transformed Vanessa's life into a carefully choreographed dance of security and misdirection. Decoy cars left at different times, varied routes that changed daily. Meetings moved to secure locations at the last minute. But more than that, he started planning something bigger, something risky. "There's an estate in Westchester," Vanessa mentioned during one late-night strategy session in her office. "I inherited it from my father. Never use it. Too big, too isolated." Bennett's mind began working. Isolated is good. Isolated means controlled environment. How much land? 30 acres, main house, guest cottage, the whole property is walled. "Show me the blueprints." They spread architectural plans across her desk, and Bennett studied them with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. Stone walls, limited access points, clear sight lines. It was defensible if prepared correctly. "We announce a private board retreat," he said slowly, the plan forming as he spoke. "Leak it through channels we know are compromised. Make it look like you'll be vulnerable. Away from the city. Minimal security. You want to use me as bait. I want to end this. They won't stop. Every failed attempt makes them more desperate, more dangerous." He looked up from the plans. "Eventually they'll get lucky, or they'll go after someone else to get to you." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. "Hudson. I've already moved him. He's with a friend upstate until this is resolved. They think he's on a school trip." Bennett's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "But yes, they might try to use him. Or Thania. Or Brielle. Anyone close to you becomes a target." She sat down heavily, the weight of responsibility pressing on her. "How did your life become collateral damage in my corporate warfare?" Bennett moved around the desk, crouching beside her chair. So they were eye level. Because I chose to help you that night at Bellamy's. And I'd choose it again. Every time. Even knowing it would lead here? Especially knowing. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You're not just a client anymore, Vanessa. You're important to me, to Hudson. We're in this together. She squeezed his hand, blinking back moisture. When this is over, when we're safe, I want to take Hudson somewhere normal. A park, a zoo, somewhere he can just be a kid without guards watching every corner. Deal. But first, we end this. The preparations took 3 days. Bennett brought in specialists he'd served with, men who owed him favors and knew how to keep silent. They transformed the Westchester estate into a fortress disguised as a weekend retreat. Motion sensors in the trees, reinforced entry points, hidden cameras covering every approach, escape routes mapped and rehearsed. The guest cottage became a panic room, stocked with supplies and communication equipment. Vanessa watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and fear. You've done this before. Set traps like this. Different circumstances, same principle. Control the environment, predict the enemy, force them into making mistakes. And if they don't come, they will. Pride won't let them walk away now. Too many failed attempts, too much invested. Bennett checked the security monitors one final time. They'll come hard and fast, expecting easy access to you. Instead, they'll find a killing ground. The night before they left for Westchester, Bennett spent the evening with Hudson via video call. His son chattered about the farm where he was staying, the horses he'd ridden, completely unaware of the danger swirling around his father. When can I come home? Hudson asked. Soon, buddy. Just a few more days. Miss you, Dad. Miss you too. More than anything. After the call ended, Vanessa found Bennett standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. He's safe, she said softly. You made sure of that. Safe isn't enough. I want him to grow up without looking over his shoulder, without wondering if someone might hurt him to get to me, or to you. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. Then we finish this. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. But neither of them slept that night, both knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would be decided. The estate waited like a held breath. Bennett moved through the main house one final time as sunset painted the walls in shades of amber and crimson. Every window, every door, every shadow memorized. Vanessa sat in the study, visible through the large bay windows, working on her laptop as if this were an ordinary evening. The bait, perfectly positioned. Thania and Brielle had both been sent away with convincing excuses. The skeleton security staff were Bennett's people, positioned strategically, waiting. Outside, darkness gathered between the trees. They'll come tonight, Bennett said into his radio. Stay sharp. At 9 p.m., the motion sensors along the north wall triggered. Bennett's earpiece crackled. Movement in the trees. Count 6. Maybe 7 individuals. Professional spacing. Copy. Let them come. He watched on the monitors as figures emerged from the darkness, moving with military precision. They'd done reconnaissance, studied the property, but they didn't know about the upgrades, the sensors, the trap closing around them. Vanessa looked up as Bennett entered the study. Showtime? Stay here until I give the all clear. If something goes wrong, there's a panic button under the desk. Hit it. And the guest cottage locks down automatically. Bennett. She stood, crossing to him. Be careful. He cupped her face, kissed her. Hard and quick. Always am. Then he was moving, slipping into the darkness like a ghost returning home. The first 2 intruders never made it past the garden. Bennett's team neutralized them silently, efficiently. Zip ties and gags, then dragged into a gardening shed that had been converted into a temporary holding cell. The 3rd and 4th tried to breach through the kitchen entrance. They found the door unlocked, inviting. Inside, Bennett waited in the shadows. The first man through died, the lights suddenly blazing, blinding after the darkness. Bennett moved fast, disarming him with a joint lock that sent the weapon clattering across tile. A chokehold, applied with just enough pressure. The man sagged, unconscious. His partner opened fire, bullets punching through cabinets. Bennett dove behind the marble island, waiting for the magazine to empty. The moment it did, he vaulted over the counter. 3 strikes, precise and devastating. The man collapsed. 2 more down. Bennett reported. Status? 3 more. Trying the east wing, came the reply. We're on them. But there was always one more. There was always the leader, the one who hung back, who learned from others' mistakes. Bennett found him in the main hall, and his blood went cold. The man held Vanessa, a gun pressed to her temple. She must have left the study, must have heard the gunfire, and come to help. Now she stood rigid, eyes wide but controlled. The famous Bennett Steele, the man said. His face was scarred, his eyes flat with professional detachment. Drop the weapon. Bennett set his gun on the floor slowly. You know this doesn't end well for you. Maybe not, but I complete my contract either way. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. She ruined my employer. Cost him everything. Now she pays. She put away a criminal, Bennett said, his voice calm even as his mind raced through scenarios. That's called justice. Justice? The man laughed, bitter and sharp. She destroyed a puppet. Cheatis. T-teen. Two says and family empire on technicalities. My employer lost everything while she built her fortune on his corpse. Bennett took a small step forward. So now you become a murderer. That help your conscience? I'm already a murderer. This is just one more. Vanessa's eyes met Bennett's. In them, he saw trust, complete, absolute trust, that he would find a way. He did what he'd been trained to do. He talked, buying seconds, watching for the opening that would come. It always came. You served, Bennett said, recognizing the stance, the bearing. What branch? Marines. 3 tours before I found more profitable work. Then you know about honor. About protecting those who can't protect themselves. Honor doesn't pay bills. Doesn't feed families. Neither does a life sentence. Another small step. You kill her, you don't walk out of here. My team has every exit covered. You're already caught. Question is whether you go down for attempted murder, or the real thing. The man's jaw tightened, doubt flickering across his face. The gun wavered, just slightly. It was enough. Bennett moved, years of training compressing into explosive action. He closed the distance before the man could react, his hand striking the gun arm, redirecting it away from Vanessa's head. The weapon discharged, the bullet punching into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Vanessa dropped, getting clear. Bennett and the man crashed together, grappling for control. They were matched in size and skill, both trained to kill. The fight was brutal, desperate. Bennett took an elbow to the ribs, felt something crack. Pain blazed, but he ignored it, drove his knee into the man's gut. They separated, circled, came together again. The man had a knife suddenly, slashing in practiced arcs. Bennett felt the blade kiss his arm, hot and sharp. He caught the wrist, twisted, heard bone snap. The knife clattered away. One final combination. Jab, cross, devastating uppercut. The man's head snapped back. He hit the floor hard, and didn't get up. Bennett stood over him, breathing hard, ribs screaming. Blood dripped from his arm, staining the expensive carpet. Vanessa ran to him, hands frantically checking for damage. You're hurt. I'm alive. We're alive. He pulled her close with his good arm. It's over. Outside, sirens wailed. His team had called local police once the threat was contained. Red and blue lights painted the windows. Official and final. Bennett held Vanessa as adrenaline drained, leaving exhaustion in its wake. They had survived, the trap had worked, and for the first time in months, the future looked like something other than an oncoming threat. The aftermath unfolded in careful, deliberate steps. 7 men arrested, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, weapons violations. The leader's employer, the imprisoned executive, found himself facing additional charges for ordering the attacks. Federal prosecutors built a case that would ensure he never saw freedom again. Bennett spent 2 days in the hospital, cracked ribs, 17 stitches in his arm, various bruises and contusions. Nothing that wouldn't heal, but enough that Hudson cried when he finally saw him, carefully hugging his father's uninjured side. "You promised you'd come back," Hudson said, voice muffled against Bennett's chest. "I always keep my promises, buddy." Vanessa visited every day, bringing flowers and terrible hospital cafeteria, coffee, sitting beside his bed and just being present. They didn't talk much about what happened. They didn't need to. When Bennett was finally released, he expected to return to his Brooklyn apartment and resume the careful invisibility he'd built before everything changed. Instead, Vanessa made a proposal. "Move in with me," she said one evening as they sat in her penthouse. Hudson was sprawled on the couch, half asleep, after a long day back at school. "Not the penthouse, somewhere new, somewhere that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours." Bennett studied her face, looking for doubt. Found none. "That's a big step. We almost died. Several times. I'm done wasting time on hesitation." She took his hand. "I love you. I love Hudson. I want to build something real with both of you. If you'll have me." Hudson, not as asleep as he'd appeared, lifted his head. "Does that mean Vanessa would be like my mom?" The question hung in the air, fragile and huge. Bennett looked at his son, seeing Julia in his eyes, but also seeing the boy who'd survived loss and was brave enough to love again. "Would you be okay with that?" Hudson considered with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. "I think Mom would like her. And I like her. So yeah, I'd be okay with it." Vanessa's eyes glistened. "I could never replace your mother, Hudson. But I would love to be part of your family, if you'll let me. Can we still have burned garlic bread on Sundays?" She laughed, the sound breaking through emotion. "Absolutely. I'm counting on it." They found a place in Manhattan, a townhouse with a small backyard, 3 bedrooms, enough space for Hudson to spread out and for Bennett to have a home office. It wasn't a penthouse, but it wasn't Brooklyn either. Something in between, like their lives now. Moving day was chaos. Hudson directed furniture placement, like a tiny general. Mrs. Davenport showed up with enough food to feed them for a week and tears in her eyes. "You deserve this," she told Bennett, squeezing his hand. "All of you." Thania and Brielle helped unpack boxes, marveling at how Vanessa's designer wardrobe mixed with Bennett's tactical gear and Hudson's toy dinosaurs. It was mismatched and perfect. That night, after Hudson was tucked into his new room, Vanessa and Bennett stood in their bedroom, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. "No regrets?" she asked. "Not one." He pulled her close, careful of his still-healing ribs. "You? Only that we didn't do this sooner." They built routines together. Breakfast as a family before Hudson's, school and Vanessa's office. Bennett consulting on security for Palmer Industries remotely, only going in when necessary. Dinners where they all contributed, usually with mixed results, but always with laughter. Hudson thrived. His drawings now included 3 figures, carefully labeled, Dad, Vanessa, me. He started calling her V, which somehow felt more intimate than any title. 6 months after moving in together, Bennett took Hudson to pick out a ring. "You're really going to ask her to marry you?" Hudson asked, examining diamonds with a jeweler's eye. "If you're okay with it, Dad. I've been okay with it since she ate my terrible cookies and said they were good." Hudson pointed to a simple band with 3 small stones. "That one." 3 stones. 3 of us. The proposal happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No fancy restaurant. No elaborate plan. Just the 3 of them in their kitchen, Hudson supposedly doing homework while actually eavesdropping. "Vanessa," Bennett said, pulling the blank ring from his pocket. We've survived corporate assassins, media scrutiny, and Hudson's science fair project. I figure marriage should be easier than all that." She laughed, then saw the ring and her breath caught. "You've given us a home," Bennett continued. "Not just a place to live, but belonging. Safety. Love. Will you marry me?" Hudson popped up from behind the counter. "Please say yes, because I already told my teacher you were going to be my stepmom." Vanessa laughed and cried at the same time, pulling them both into a hug. "Yes, absolutely yes." The wedding was small, held in the townhouse's garden 6 months later. Hudson served as best man and ring bearer and gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. Mrs. Davenport wept openly. Thania and Brielle coordinated like they were running a Fortune 500 company. And when Bennett and Vanessa exchanged vows, promising to love and protect, and occasionally burn garlic bread together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Palmer Industries flourished under Vanessa's leadership, now with security protocols that became industry standard. Bennett started a consulting firm, teaching other executives how to spot threats before they materialized. Hudson grew, thrived, became the kid who wasn't afraid to love loudly and completely. He kept Julia's picture by his bed, and Vanessa never tried to take that space. Instead, she created her own, filled with new memories and unconditional acceptance. On their first anniversary, Bennett woke to find Vanessa already up, standing by the window watching the sunrise. "Thinking about something?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. "Thinking about how I almost missed this. If those men hadn't attacked that night, if you hadn't been there, I'd still be alone in my penthouse, calling it success while feeling empty. I'd still be invisible, thinking survival was enough." She turned in his arms. "We saved each other. Best rescue mission I ever ran." From down the hall came the sound of Hudson's alarm, followed by his usual morning chaos. Their life, loud and messy and absolutely perfect. "Ready for another day?" Vanessa asked. Bennett kissed her forehead. "With you, always." 10 years passed like a breath and a lifetime all at once. Bennett stood in the kitchen of their townhouse, now worn in all the right ways. Scuff marks on the hardwood from years of Hudson running through. Photos covering every surface, moments frozen in time. The refrigerator still held drawings, though now they were architectural sketches from Hudson's college portfolio, instead of crayon dinosaurs. "Dad, you're burning the garlic bread again," 18-year-old Hudson called from the dining room. His voice deeper now, but carrying the same teasing affection it always had. "It's called tradition." Bennett shot back, pulling the pan from the oven. The edges were crisp, borderline charred, exactly how they liked it. Vanessa emerged from her office, reading glasses perched on her nose, silver threading through her hair now. She'd stepped back from day-to-day operations at Palmer Industries 2 years ago, focusing instead on mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs, especially women trying to build empires while the world told them they couldn't. "Smells perfect," she said, kissing Bennett's cheek as she passed. They gathered at the table, the same one they'd eaten at for a decade. Hudson filled the space with stories about his architecture program, about the building he was designing for his thesis. Bennett and Vanessa listened, asked questions, offered thoughts. This was what survival had become. Not just getting through the day, but savoring it. After dinner, Hudson headed out to meet friends. At the door, he paused, turned back. "Love you guys, even if Dad can't cook." "Love you too, smartass," Bennett replied. When the door closed, the house settled into comfortable quiet. Vanessa and Bennett moved to the back porch, their evening ritual. The city hummed beyond their small garden. But here, in this pocket of peace, the world felt manageable. "Do you ever think about that night?" Vanessa asked, her hand finding his. "At Bellamy's, sometimes. Feels like a different life." It was. For both of us. She leaned against him. "I was so lonely then. Surrounded by people, but completely alone. Building an empire and calling it enough." Bennett thought about the man he'd been. Invisible, broken, convinced his best days were behind him. A father doing his best but not believing in much beyond the next meal, the next rent payment. Hudson asked me something last week, he said. Asked if I thought his mom would approve of how things turned out. What did you tell him? That Julia wanted us to be happy. That she'd love seeing him thriving, seeing us build this life. That grief doesn't mean we stop living, it means we live enough for those who can't. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. I never met her, but I'm grateful to her every day. For Hudson. For raising him to be open to love even after loss. For loving you in a way that taught you how to love again. They sat in silence, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. A decade ago, Bennett had been a man trying to disappear. Vanessa had been a woman isolated by success. Hudson had been a boy who'd lost his mother and didn't understand why the world could be so cruel. Now they were a family, imperfect, complicated, bound together by choice and commitment, and the kind of love that grows from showing up every day. We did good, Bennett said finally. We did perfect. From inside, Bennett's phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Davenport, now in her 70s, but still bringing empanadas and unsolicited advice. A photo of her garden, asking if they'd come to dinner Sunday. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. Bennett thought about the scared single father he'd been, washing dishes in a restaurant, trying to stay invisible. He thought about the moment everything changed, when instinct overcame fear, and he stepped into danger to protect a stranger. That choice had led here. To a home filled with laughter, to a son who was confident and kind, to a partner who saw him completely and loved him anyway. Thank you, he whispered. Vanessa turned to him. For what? For being stubborn enough to find me. For not letting me hide. She smiled. That same smile that had disarmed him in a grocery store all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to be found. Inside, the kitchen light glowed warm. Their home, their life, built from survival into something beautiful. Not perfect, but real. Not without scars, but stronger because of them. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.